Good morning, sir. Myself Bharat, and I am representing Group 4. And our topic is environmental epidemiology. And Group 4 consists of myself Bharat, Mansi, Abin, Shraddha, Purnima, and Robert Danyu. So let's continue with our topic. Environmental health. What is environmental health? Environmental health is a branch of public health that mainly focuses on the relationship between people and their environment. It promotes human health and well-being and fosters a healthy and safe community. Environmental health was defined in 1989 document by WHO World Health Organization as those aspects of human health and diseases that are determined by factors in the environment is known as environmental health. This is defined by WHO World Health Organization in 1989. So environmental health is concerned with all aspects of natural and built environment that may affect human health. Environmental health is also a field of science that studies how the environment influences the human health and disease. Here, environment in this context means identifying and addressing how environment impacts human health. Environment health is a very diverse field where professionals from a variety of research they form a variety of research, investigations, outreach and education, environmental cleanups and much more. And that concludes the first topic of environmental health. The second part will be continued by Mansi. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharat. Next, I will continue. Why is environment health important? Environmental health is a key part of any comprehensive public health system. The field works to advance policies and programs to reduce chemical and other environmental exposures in air, water, soil, and food to protect people and provide communities with healthier environments. The major sub-disciplines of environmental health are environmental science, toxicology, environmental epidemiology, and environmental and occupational medicine. And also maintaining a healthy environment is central of increasing quality of life and years of healthy life. Environmental health is a subset of public health that focuses on the interaction between people and their surrounding, promotes human health and well-being, and fosters healthy and safe community. Next, I will gonna say to important contributors to global burden of disease, that is unsafe water, hygiene, and extract disposal, urban air pollution, indoor smogs from household use of solid fuels, leading causes of death in low and middle income countries linked with environmental factors. That is first of third lower respiratory infection, 6 chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, 7 diarrheal disease, lower respiratory infections and diarrhea account 30 percentage of all that is children 1 to 40 years of age. That's all about my part. Next, Abin continue with his topic.
Hello everyone, this is Shraddha Tambulkar from 16B BS Biology. Uh, as of now, I'm going to explain exposure and dose rates. Let's try to understand first exposure. Exposure means a measure of radiation based on the ability to produce ionization expressed in reactants, and the dose is a measure a quantity of a medicine, nutrient or pathogen which is delivered as a unit. The greater the quantity of delivered, the larger the dose. Dose are most commonly measured for the compounds in a medicine. Variations in rates. Change in environment condition often cause variations in exposure or dose rates. Exposure rate may vary at one site over time and from monitor to monitor as a result of changes in weather such as precipitation and changes in atmospheric pressure, cosmic radiation, increases with the altitude and also varies continually continually due to changes in the sun's patterns and all other radiations hitting the earth from space. Terrestrial radiations is types of radionuclides in the soil and building materials near the monitor. We try to estimate the dose response relationship. Estimation of the dose response relationship for carcinogens is the process of estimating the magnitude or an upper bound on the magnitude of the carcinogenic effect of any given dose for radiation exposure. Best estimates of the carcinogenic effect of a given dose normally are emphasized. Estimation of carcinogenic response to exposure to particular radionuclides is greatly facilitated by the generally held view, which is based on observation and modeling, that the observed dose is in tissues is the fundamental physical quantity that determines the response to any exposure. Thank you so much. I'm done with my part. From the next slide, Abin will continue the presentation. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Evan and my topic is going to be the use of dose or risk assessment in developing radiation standards. In principle, radiation standards expressed in terms of dose or risk can be developed without the need to consider exposure, pathways, and dose or risk assessments for this exposure situations of concern. If a standard is expressed directly in terms of risk, all that is required in developing the standard is a judgment about a limit on acceptable risk. Similarly, if a standard is based only on a judgment about acceptable risk but is expressed in terms of dose as a surrogate for risk, the only additional requirement is an assumption about the risk per unit dose. For purposes of developing standards expressed in terms of dose, the risk per unit dose normally is assumed to be independent of the particular radionuclides and exposure pathways of concern. In practice, however, some type of exposure pathway and dose or risk assessment normally is used in developing radiation standards. Even when the standards are expressed only in terms of dose or risk, for example, such assessments are required by the National Environmental Policy Act whenever imposition of standard would have substantial economic or environmental impacts. More generally, dose or risk assessments are important in developing radiation standards because the risks posed by environmental exposures are not directly observable and dose often cannot be measured, especially the dose from internal exposure. Next slide is dose or risk assessments are important in developing radiation standards in the following ways. First, if a standard is expressed in terms of dose or risk and is based on a judgment about acceptable risk. Second is if a standard is expressed in terms of dose or risk but is based on a judgment about the achievability of doses or risk for the exposure situations of concern. Third is radiation standards might be expressed in terms of directly measurable quantities such as concentrations of radionuclides in environmental medias or external exposure rates rather than in terms of dose or risk which cannot be measured.
Good day everyone, Purnima Rai this side, and today I am going to discuss about assertive risk in environmental epidemiology. So areas of focus of risk factors. First we will discuss about hazards. So anything that can cause injury, death, disease damage to the personal or public property or deterioration or destruction of environmental components. We face countless environmental hazards every day. Next, Let's know about risk. Probability of suffering a loss as a result of exposure to a hazard. A number of specific environmental issues can impede human health and wellness. It's called risk. Next, let's discuss defining risk factors. So, what are risk factor? A risk factor refers to an aspect of personal habit or an environmental exposure that is associated with an increased probability of occurrence of a disease. Since risk factors can usually be modified, intervening to alter them in a favorable direction can reduce the probability of occurrence of disease. The impact of these interventions can be determined by repeated measures using the same method and definition. Now, let's discuss measuring risk factors. Risk factor can be measured by different ways. Risk factor can include tobacco and alcohol use, diet, physical inactivity, blood pressure, and obesity be used to predict future disease. The measurement at a population level is important but also challenging. So, comparing disease occurrence. The occurrence of disease or other health state is the first step of epidemiological process. The next step is complexion, occurrence in two or more growth people whose exposures have a differ ways. The exposed people can help different level and duration on being exposure. The total amount of these factors that reaches in an individual is called dose. So that's all about my part. Thank you.
A good day to everyone. I'm Dania Robert going to explain the topic about the risk assessment, comparison of risk, difference, and the relative risk. And the last topic is about the attribution of risk. As we started to speak broadly, a risk assessment is the component efforts of identifying, analyzing the potential, which means the future events that may negatively impact individuals, assets, and the environment, such as the natural calamities, and in making judgment on the tolerability of the risk on the basis of the risk analysis. While considering the influencing factors, put in the similar terms, a risk assessment determines the possible misshapes, either like a hood and consequences, and a tolerance for such events. The result of this process may be expressed in equality or quantitative fashion. Risk assessment is inequality part of a broader risk management strategy to help reduce and potential risk related consequences. Now, let's talk about the comparison between the risk difference and relative risk. Comparison of the risk difference, which is the risk difference also called the excess risk, is a difference in rate of occurrence between exposed and unexposed group in a population. It is a useful measure of the extent of the public health problems caused by the exposure. And about the relative risk, also known as the risk ratio, is the risk occurrence of disease among exposed people to that among the unexposed. The risk ratio is the better indicator of the strength of association. At the last point of the presentation, the assessment risk. The process of risk assessment may be somewhat informal at the individual social level, managing economic and the household risk. The process at the strategic cooperation level. However, in both the cases, the ability to anticipate future events and create effective strategy for migrating them when deemed unacceptable is vital. At the individual level, a simple process of identifying the object and risk, weighting their importance, and creating the plans may be all that necessary. At this strategic organizational level, more elaborate policies are necessary, specifying the acceptable level of risk procedures to be followed within the organization, priorities, and allocations of resources. At the systematic level, the management involved with the project produces the project level risk assessment with the assistance of the availability as a part of planning process and a set of system to ensure the required action to manage the assessed risk are in place. At the dynamic level, the personnel directly involved may be required to deal with unforeseen problem in real time